Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a topic that can genuinely transform our lives. He was homeless, freezing in the cold, yet when he saw a stranger collapse, he gave the last bit of food he had. He didn't know that stranger was the mayor. And what happened next changed everything. Late one winter night, when the wind blew like sharp needles and the city felt like a place carved from ice, a homeless man named David sat beneath an old cracked bridge whose concrete pillars were stained by years of rain and the passing of time. The night sky was a dull, faded gray, as if even the stars had retreated from the cold, leaving only the moon to cast its weak silver glow over the empty streets. David wrapped his thin, tattered coat tightly around himself, but the fabric was worn down from countless nights like this one, and the freezing air slipped through it with cruel ease, biting at his skin as though determined to remind him that he did not belong to the warmth of indoor life. His fingers felt stiff and numb, and he had long since stopped being able to feel the tips of them. His breath came out in faint white clouds that drifted into the night air before dissolving into nothing, just like the hope he once held so strongly, back in the days when he had a home, a family, and a future he believed would be bright. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the burning ache in his stomach felt like a constant reminder of everything he lacked. The hunger gnawed at him relentlessly, a deep, painful emptiness that no words could describe. Yet even as his body protested, growling loudly and angrily, he ignored it. He had learned how to quiet hunger, how to bury it deep, how to push away the longing for something warm and filling, because when you have nothing, you learn to live on nothing. The cold, however, was harder to ignore. It seeped into his bones, making him tremble uncontrollably, as though his body were shaking not just from the cold, but from the weight of everything he had lost. Despite his suffering, despite how the world had forgotten him, David still held on to something gentle inside him, something that hardship had not been able to strip away. So when he saw movement, a man stumbling and collapsing near the edge of the street, David did not hesitate. The world around him may have turned its back on him, but he refused to turn his back on another person. He pushed himself up from the cold concrete, ignoring the pain that shot through his knees, and hurried toward the man who now lay curled on the ground. The stranger was well-dressed, wearing a heavy coat of fine wool, polished shoes, and a scarf that looked like it had never seen dirt or wear. The sight of such clothing usually meant a life of comfort, warmth, security, everything David had not known in a long time. Yet now, the man looked fragile, vulnerable, his face pale, his breathing shallow. David knelt beside him and gently helped him sit up, supporting the man's back with surprising tenderness. Hey, stay with me," David whispered, his voice soft, concerned, carrying no judgment, only compassion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tiny scrap of food he had left, a small piece of bread, stale and hard, barely more than a bite. It was all he had, his last possession of sustenance, but to him the decision to give it away was simple. "Here," he said quietly, placing the bread into the stranger's trembling hand. "You need it more than I do." The man's eyes lifted to meet his, and though they were heavy with exhaustion, they glimmered with gratitude, a silent recognition of a kindness that needed no explanation. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice thin and weak. "I'll never forget this." David nodded once, as though the moment required nothing more, no grand gestures, no acknowledgement, no promises. He didn't stay to receive praise or gratitude. He stood up slowly, his joints aching, and walked away into the cold, unaware that the man he had just saved was none other than Mayor Thomas Walker, a man whose face appeared on posters, news screens, and campaign banners all throughout the city. The mayor had been trying to quietly pass through the area after narrowly escaping a protest crowd that had turned chaotic, slipping away unnoticed. But in the chaos and exhaustion, his body had given out, and he had collapsed alone. David knew none of that. To him, the man was simply someone in need. That was reason enough. The next morning, the city buzzed with noise and urgency. Police cars sped through intersections. News vans lined up outside government buildings. Headlines blared from newspapers, radios, and televisions. "Mayor found safe." Cameramen shouted questions, reporters hurried to type out statements, and staff members scrambled to secure public appearances. But David saw none of it. He was busy searching for cardboard to patch a hole in his friend Michael's sleeping tent. To David, survival was not about one dramatic moment. It was about constant, quiet acts of endurance and small kindnesses. He didn't know the world was looking for someone like him. Days later, when the mayor stepped onto a stage for a press conference, the crowd watched him with stunned silence as he spoke, not about policy or politics, but about a man with nothing who still gave everything. "A homeless man saved my life," the mayor said, his voice trembling, heavy with emotion. "A man society has ignored, overlooked, dismissed, did not hesitate to show me compassion when I needed it most. And he gave me the last of what he had. He reminded me what kindness truly is. Kindness that asks for nothing, expects nothing, but gives because it is right." His words echoed across the city, touching hearts in a way speeches rarely did. And somewhere far away from cameras and microphones, David sat outside his tent, his hands cupped around a small flame inside an old metal can, trying to stay warm, unaware that the world had begun to search for him, not to pity him, not to remove him, but to honor him. And so while the city buzzed with his name, though he did not yet know it, David remained where he always had been, beneath the bridge and among the quiet company of those who had learned to survive with nothing but one another. The cold days continued, and with them came more struggle, more hunger, more nights where sleep felt impossible, because the ground was too hard, the air too bitter, and the weight of loneliness too heavy. Yet David remained gentle, offering half of whatever he found to others who suffered beside him. An old man with shaking hands who spoke softly about memories that kept him alive, a young runaway girl whose eyes had seen more sorrow than most could bear, and Michael, his closest friend, who coughed constantly from the cold, but still tried to smile each morning. They were a forgotten community, invisible to the world that hurried past them on its way to warm homes, bright stores, busy offices. People often walked by with their collars up, avoiding eye contact, as if acknowledging those who suffered would somehow make them responsible. But David never blamed them. He had once been one of them, living a life where pain and poverty were distant troubles that belonged to someone else. He had once had a home, a job, dreams. He once believed that life would always move in a straight line forward. But life had changed in one terrible, unexpected moment, as life often does. A factory accident, a long hospital stay, bills he could not pay, the loss of work, and slowly, like sand slipping through fingers, the loss of everything else. And yet, even after losing everything, David held onto a heart that the world could not break. Meanwhile, in City Hall, Mayor Thomas Walker could not shake the image of the man who had helped him. For days, he thought about the warmth in David's voice, the steady way he had lifted him, the way he had given away his last piece of bread without hesitation. The mayor found himself looking out windows and imagining the bridge where the man slept, wondering how the world had come to a place where someone like David had nothing while others had more than they could ever use. The mayor's staff urged him to move forward with political tasks and public appearances, but his mind remained fixed on the man who had shown him a version of humanity that he felt he himself had forgotten. The press continued to ask questions, citizens spoke about the speech, and donations to homeless shelters began to increase. But to Thomas, all of that meant nothing unless he found David himself. So he ordered a citywide effort, not a search for a criminal or a fugitive, but a search for a good man. Word spread quietly among police officers, social workers, volunteers. They were told not to force, not to threaten, not to pressure, just to find him and bring him safely. Days passed before one afternoon, as the sky grayed and snow began to fall again, a black city vehicle rolled slowly to a stop near the encampment where David sat repairing Michael S. blanket with an old needle and thread. Two officers stepped out, not with sternness but with gentleness in their movements and softness in their eyes. "David," one of them asked quietly, as though afraid to frighten him. David looked up, unsure whether to answer, but there was no hostility in their faces. "We'd like to take you to City Hall," the officer continued. "The mayor asked for you, personally." For a moment, David thought this must be a mistake. Why would someone like the mayor want anything to do with him? But something in the way the officer spoke, careful, respectful, told him this was not a trap. Michael squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. "Go," he whispered hoarsely, a small smile tugging at cracked lips. Maybe this is your turn." The car ride to City Hall felt unreal. The seats were soft, warm. The engine hummed steadily, unlike the harsh sounds of wind and traffic David was used to hearing. He stared out the window as familiar streets looked suddenly unfamiliar from the other side of glass, so close yet separated by a world of difference. When they arrived, the building towered above him, grand and imposing, its steps wide, its entrance polished, its walls glowing in the afternoon light. David stood at the bottom of the staircase for a moment, overwhelmed, feeling like a man who had stumbled into a dream he wasn't meant to enter. The officers led him inside, down long hallways lined with portraits of leaders, through doors of polished wood, until they reached a large office, and there, standing in the center of the room, was Mayor Thomas Walker, no longer surrounded by cameras, crowds, or speeches. Just a man. A man who had once collapsed in the cold. A man who had been shown kindness when he most needed it. When the mayor saw David, his eyes immediately filled with tears, not of pity, but of recognition, of respect, of something deep and human. He stepped toward him slowly, his voice catching in his throat. "David," he said softly, as though speaking to a friend he had long missed. "You reminded me what leadership truly means. Kindness. You showed me the power of giving, even when you have nothing left to give. You taught me something no title or position ever could." Then, with hands that trembled with sincerity, the mayor reached into his coat and pulled out a small key on a simple ring. He held it out, not as charity, not as reward, but as acknowledgement. "This is for you," he said. "A home, a place that is warm, safe, yours." David's breath caught, his eyes burning as tears welled quietly. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him, cracking like ice under weight. Finally, he managed to whisper, "I just did what was right." The mayor nodded, his own voice breaking. "And that," he said, "is exactly why the world needed to see you." For the first time in a very long time, David felt something he had nearly forgotten: belonging. And warmth, not just the warmth of a heated room or thick walls, but the warmth of being seen, valued, remembered. That warmth was the beginning of home. From that day forward, David's life shifted slowly but surely, like the gradual thaw of ice beneath the first warm days of spring. And though he moved into the small apartment the mayor had given him, the transition was not simply about having a roof overhead. It was about learning to believe, once again, that he was allowed to be part of the world he had been pushed out of for so long. The apartment was modest, a single room with clean white walls, a bed that felt almost too soft after years of sleeping on cold ground, a small kitchen with a stove that hummed quietly, and a window that looked out over the city streets. But to David it was a castle, a sanctuary, a miracle he touched each morning just to be sure it was real. The first night he slept there, he lay awake for hours, not because he could not sleep, but because the bed was warm and he needed to remember how to relax, how to breathe without fear of freezing, how to let his muscles unclench after years of tension. He ran his fingers across the blanket, marveling at how something so simple could feel like luxury. In the following days, Mayor Walker visited him, not as a politician fulfilling a duty, but as a man building a friendship. They shared quiet conversations over tea, the mayor asking about David's life, not just the hardships, but the joys he once knew, the dreams he once held. And David slowly, cautiously allowed himself to speak about memories long buried. A small apartment with sunlight that came through the windows and golden ribbons, a woman he had loved deeply, a job where he took pride in his hands and their strength, laughter shared over simple dinners and the way life had felt before everything unraveled. The mayor listened, not to fix, not to judge, but to understand. True leadership, he now believed, meant listening to the voices forgotten by society. Soon after, David began working at the city shelter, the very place that offered warmth and safety to people who lived the life he knew so intimately. His job was not glamorous, cleaning floors, organizing supplies, helping prepare meals. But he did it with dignity, and he did it with a compassion that could not be taught. He knew the pain of sleeping on concrete. He knew the emptiness of hunger. He knew the silent cry of loneliness. And so when others arrived at the shelter, shivering, frightened, uncertain, David did not greet them with rules or instructions. He greeted them with warmth, a gentle voice, and recognition. "Come in," he would say, guiding them through the door. "You're safe now. Rest. You're not alone." Those words carried weight because they came from someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten. People at the shelter began to trust him, not because of his new position, but because of the quiet kindness that radiated from him. Some nights, he sat beside them on the floor just to listen, to stories of losses, regrets, hopes that still flickered softly even in the darkest moments. And in listening, David found something he had lost: purpose. Meanwhile, the story of the homeless man who had saved the mayor continued to spread not as sensational news but as a reminder shared among strangers' families, classrooms, places of worship, an example of how goodness can come from anywhere and how heroism is not always loud or grand. Donations to shelters increased. Volunteers began to show up. People began to look at the homeless not with fear or dismissal, but with curiosity, empathy, and respect. It didn't change the world entirely, not all at once, but it shifted something, a slow turning of the heart of the city. And David, though he had never asked for recognition, became a quiet symbol of hope. On weekends, he returned to the bridge, not to stay, but to bring blankets, warm food, and conversation. He found Michael and the others, and he did not come to rescue them or claim superiority. He came to sit beside them as he always had. "Don't forget us," Michael once said, his voice cracking. David placed a hand on his shoulder and answered, "I could never." Over time, enough support gathered that temporary housing programs expanded, shelters gained resources, and some of David's friends slowly moved into safety as well. It was not perfect, and it was not easy. Progress rarely is. But it mattered. And each morning when David walked to work, he passed by the city streets he once wandered in despair, now walking with purpose, with steadiness, with belonging. There were still difficult days. There were still moments when memories of hunger, cold, and loneliness resurfaced. Healing is not the erasure of the past. It is learning how to live with it gently. But in those moments, David remembered the night he had given his last piece of bread to a stranger in need, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. That moment became a seed, planted in frozen ground, nurtured by time, kindness, and courage, growing into a new life. And in the end, the truth of his journey became clear. Home is not just a roof or a room. It is the warmth of being seen, valued, remembered. David had been a man the world overlooked, a man unseen by crowds that hurried past, but kindness had made him visible again. He had given when he had nothing, and the world in time gave back, not in wealth, not in fame, but in belonging, dignity, and love. And so, the man who once slept beneath a bridge in winter now woke each morning to the soft golden light of sunrise through his own window, and he smiled. Not because life was perfect, but because he was home. And in the quiet spaces of his heart, where loneliness once lived, something new had taken root. Peace. Sometimes the people who have the least give the most. If this story touched your heart, leave a ya. Tell me in the comments, what does kindness mean to you? Let's spread kindness together. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart and comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting stories videos.